My name is Senator Sharon Weston Broome, and I am so delighted to be here this afternoon, and I am extremely proud about the assignment that I have been given, and that is to introduce our keynote luncheon speaker, Ms. Renee Lewis Glover. More than 16 years ago, Renee Glover left behind her career as a successful corporate finance attorney to become Chief Executive Officer of the Atlanta Housing Authority. She didn't try to gloss over the failings of that system of 14,000 apartment units, but instead she embarked on a program of radical change. So dramatic that today, that's zero of the Atlanta public housing projects the Atlanta Authority owned and operated 20 years ago are still standing. She has been described as someone who has brought innovation and clear improvement to a big city public housing system. In 2009, Ms. Glover received the Urban Innovator, which has been awarded annually since 2000. Previous winners include Chicago Mayor Richard Daley, Florida Governor Jeb Bush, Miami Mayor Manuel Diaz, and New Orleans School Superintendent Paul Vallis. Now, here's what Howard Hussick, the Vice President for Policy Research at the Manhattan Institute, says of Renee Glover. Renee Glover stands as a courageous role model for public housing reformers across the country. She understood that government just shouldn't be in the business of operating dilapidated, high-crime housing projects, and she put a stop to it. Mr. Hussick went on to say that Renee Glover deserves the Urban Innovator Award not just for having the courage to demolish aging public housing, but for the courage and imagination to envision and implement an alternative. In Atlanta during Ms. Glover's tenure, the employment rate among public housing tenants as low as 13% in some projects has risen above 60%. And her success in implementation is influencing policy. Secretary of Housing and Urban Development Shawn Donovan has signaled her desire to give other public housing authorities the same flexibility to experiment in the ways that Atlanta has. For more than 16 years, Glover has been an urban policy thought leader who changed the face of urban policies and failed public housing in Atlanta. The Atlanta model has been successfully adopted in many cities across the nation, including Chicago, Baltimore, Seattle, Denver, and others. Research found that under Glover's guidance, the living conditions of thousands of people have improved, crime has dropped dramatically, the educational prospects of children have been enhanced greatly, and employment among Atlanteans who receive rental assistance has increased. When AHA adopted a work requirement in 2004, only 16% of those who lived in AHA-owned developments were working, Glover said. Today that number exceeds 60%. As I was doing a little online biographical research about Ms. Glover, just to make sure that I had covered her many accolades, which we won't cover in this introduction, I ran across a comment that a reader had made about an article about Ms. Glover. It read, "Everything said about Ms. Glover in this article is factual, but what was not mentioned is that Ms. Glover loves people and does everything possible to enhance their quality of life. She works long hours and weekends to ensure that the agency is providing the services deserved by every client and employee. She has contracted and hired many qualified individuals to assist her in this endeavor with the understanding that she requires staff to be accountable, to possess integrity, and be responsible for achieving the goals and standards that she has set and exemplifies. I enjoyed working with her for more than 10.5 years and hope that others recognize the achievements of this great innovator and friend."
we came up with these guiding principles. We have 5 guiding principles that have governed our work since I got started. The first being ending concentrated poverty, and we have done that. In the introduction, we closed the last of the large housing projects at the end of our fiscal year, June 30, 2010. And of course, all of the people that worry about these things came forward. They said, well, you know, it won't work, the people are going to fail, they can't live in mainstream America. Just think about the fact that as a group of policymakers, we're worrying about continuing a system that is systematically destroying. I mean, we know that systematically the children will get destroyed, the families will get destroyed, and maybe an extraordinary person might get out. You know, like we just celebrated Sotomayor as the, you know, the first Hispanic justice of the Supreme Court. Well, we have a whole bunch of Sotomayors living in all of these communities, but we got to get the policies right. The uglier side of the worry, and this involves both African Americans and other races as well, is are the people, if they are allowed to get out of those properties, are they going to come live next door to me? And people don't want to talk about that because, you know, it's some more of those isms coming out. Because the same isms that had the debate going around Jim Crow and around slavery are with us today. And if we're not careful, we can find ourselves in that conversation. You know, the whole Section 8 discussion about someone taking a voucher and moving into neighborhoods and what have you. So we got to straighten all of that out because there's a lot at stake here. There is a lot at stake. I'll tell you, there were a couple of projects that were up and running before we tore down these terrible places, and I'll just give you some statistics. Our very first community that we transformed, Techwood Clark Howell, in the 1990s, Atlanta was the most violent city in the United States, 1990s. And we had the highest violent crime rate, more than any other city in the country. Just one of the properties, Techwood Clark Howell, had a violent crime rate 35 times that of the city. Now you just think about women and children and elderly persons trying to negotiate that. You know, you got your own little Afghanistan going right there on that property. And then we had another property called East Lake Meadows that was known in town as Little Vietnam. And it wasn't because Vietnamese people were living there, it was because there was so many drugs and so much violent crime at that one site that that was the nickname. And the general statement was, you shouldn't go over there. Now we had children and families trying to negotiate that. So, I mean, that's just indecent. I mean, it's just indecent just to think that that's the arrangement. They pulled the short straw, and so be it. So, you know, ending that practice was critically important. The second principle is doing public-private partnerships, because in creating market rate communities, no one thinks of a market rate community being developed under the flag of a government agency. So working with folks like the fine people that I introduced you to earlier, we have done that. And so the best compliment we get is that that doesn't look like any poor people are living there. Well, that's exactly the point. You know, you don't know what your neighbors earn, and so what we're trying to do is create market rate communities that have built inside of them the disposable income that are going to attract the kind of investments that are needed to transform a community and transform a property. And then, of course, the standards and expectations have been set such that all of the families living there are all living to the same set of high standards, and it works. I mean, we now have 15, 16 years under our belt to know that that works. The third thing is we understand that these communities, if they are children-centered, they have to be approached comprehensively. And so we had to immediately get into the conversation with the school system, because we all know that at the end of the day, the great equalizer is education. And we all should be so passionate about that issue, because if we can truly get our kids excited about learning, that is the game changer. And so we've been focused, and we've redoubled our effort. We're now looking at early childhood development. We're looking at having better partnerships. One of the communities has a charter school. Another community has a newly reformed school, and those schools are performing and performing well. Not around the margin, but around truly getting the kids excited about education. And the inaugural class of Centennial Place Elementary, that was part of our first mixed-use, mixed-income communities, we have young people who are now going to Georgia Tech, one of the finest engineering and technology schools in the country, Brandeis University, University of Pennsylvania, Howard, Spelman, Morehouse. You get the drift. All of a sudden now, rather than everybody wringing their hands and saying, oh my goodness, what happened to the kids? They dropped out of high school and this, that, and the other. We're now on to something, because that's what we want as a society. We want great, successful young people who can use their God-given gifts to make things happen, and make it happen in a huge way. So we also look at the quality of parks, we look at the quality of the retail. So you're really into a community building program, because what we're talking about is creating great communities, and we all know what great communities look like. And we have to do it. I was reading The Economist last week, talking about what's happening in America around unemployment. And the name of the article was, I think, The Decline of the Working Man. And I'll just cite one statistic that just struck me, and it was so powerful. It said that 70% of African American males who drop out of high school will not be engaged in the workforce. That's 70%. Now, if that's not a call to action, and if that is not a call upon us to start thinking about these issues differently, then I don't know what is. Because back in the 60s, Patrick Moynihan talked about the absence of men in the workforce and the relation to that in the breakdown of the family. And so if you look at today's statistics, they really get explained by just that simple fact. So if we do nothing else, we've got to get education right, and we can do it. But again, it's about thinking about these issues differently, and then through the right types of policies and letting the political foolishness and all the adult arguments that we like to fuss about. You know, the things that we argue about generally are adult issues and have nothing to do with children. But if we really care, and if we really want to make a difference and make a change, we can do it, okay, if we come together. If we come together and really turn this thing around. But when I read that article, and I commend it to your attention, you know, it's something that we've got to get on top of, because if you just think about the implications of that, that is staggering, because people are going to live. So what does that mean if you just carry out the argument? People will either become dependent on some type of subsidy, or worse, they'll end up in the criminal system. And then that just has a multiplier effect. Okay? And folks, we are the direct cause of that, because we've let partisan politics and bad policy making and all the isms in the world inform our decisions, and we are foolish enough to think, oh, well, I made it, so I'm going to pull the gate up and everything's going to be fine. Well, guess what, folks? That's not a sustainable strategy. And so we've got to be about the business of focusing on this. Now, the fourth principle is working with private partners and leveraging private resources and leveraging private know-how. Now, that's very important because, again, no one is aspiring to housing that the government is developing because, you know, it's good that there are government subsidies, but we're really about community building here and making a transformation. And so that really calls on the public agency to be an asset manager. And so we come together, we leverage private dollars. We have invested to date about $220 million of federal grants, but that has leveraged itself some 10 times. So there's been about $2 billion of economic impact in areas all across the city that have literally incented a great transformation, not just in those areas, but generally about a mile around each one of the sites. And so this is also very much about an economic development strategy and transforming areas that had long been disinvested for decades. So it can work, but it's very important that we look at the fundamentals. And the last concept has everything to do about the people, and that's around standard setting and expectation setting. And we should set the standards and expectations as high as we are capable of setting them, because the people, God's children, will exceed those things if we create communities of opportunity and we provide support and linkages so that people can overcome it. So you might say, well, you know, Renee, that's fine, but is that really doable? Well, I go back to the personal stories, and you think about your own personal stories. Abraham Lincoln in 1901, okay? He overcame a whole bunch, a whole lot, and there are so many of those stories. Those are modern day parables. And if you think about your own family stories, your own friends' stories, anything is possible with God. So why should we in 2011 think it is even less possible today than it was in that era? And there are millions of success stories. And no, we can't account for them, but we have to make sure that we are faith-driven and that we believe, and we're not so patronizing that we think we know better than people that have come long before us who fought those battles and have been able to be successful. So I share these thoughts with you. I know you're probably facing many of the challenges that are being faced all over the country, but I will say this: it is doable, it is achievable, and if we get all of the adult nonsense out of the way and we focus just purely on what it is that we want to see our society to be and what we want our communities to be, we would be amazed at how much we can accomplish working together and making it happen. So I appreciate your attention this evening, and thank you.